believe that inside a hospital, where everything should be controlled, monitored, and safe, someone can simply disappear without leaving a trace? What if I told you that the cameras saw everything, but what they recorded couldn't be explained? Today, you will learn the true story of a man who entered a hospital in São Paulo and was never the same again. The case was hushed up, the files disappeared, and to this day, no one can understand what really happened that morning. Press play, subscribe, and activate the bell, because this is one of those stories that Aurora Hospital try to tell before someone tells you to shut up. It was a cold Tuesday when Messias Santos Bastos arrived at Mandaqui Hospital in São Paulo. His mother held his hand tightly, trying to hide her fear. He was 33 years old, agitated, and spoke incoherently, but he still recognized his own name. The security guard at the entrance wrote down the time, 29:47. The surveillance camera shows him entering wearing a white t-shirt and dark pants, and it's the last clear image of him that would exist. Messias was transferred to the psychiatric ward after a brief triage appointment. "We'll observe him for 48 hours, the doctor said. The mother signed the papers without imagining that this simple act would be the beginning of a search that would last days and that would leave the entire country without understanding what had happened. The first few hours were normal. Nurses report that he slept, woke up, and ate, but around 3:12 in the morning, something strange started to happen. The internal system monitors showed strange movement in the hallway. A shadow crossed the camera's field of view, and then, seconds later, the image froze. When the system came back, the room was empty. The crumpled sheet, the pillow on the floor, and the torn identification bracelet beside the bed. No cameras showed him leaving, no employees saw him pass, no alarm sounded. It was as if Messiah had evaporated into thin air. The medical team began to search discreetly, fearing panic on the morning shift. But as the hours passed, the feeling in the hospital changed. Some nurses swear they heard footsteps in the empty hallway and a male voice calling someone's name. Others claim to have seen a shadow standing in front of the ICU's glass door, motionless as if watching. And in the internal report, one detail caught our attention. One of the motion sensors in Ward 3 has been activated at exactly 3:13 a.m., 1 minute after the cameras froze, but there was no one there. The clock read 6:10 a.m. when the team realized that Messias was really nowhere to be found. First, they searched the bathrooms, hallways, and emergency stairs. Then, security was called. Mandaqui Hospital's internal protocol required the immediate blocking of exits. But when guards arrived at the gates, external cameras showed something disturbing. No recordings recorded the passage of a man wearing the clothes described. Messias's mother arrived at 8 a.m. with a blanket in her hands. She didn't know it yet. A nurse hesitated before speaking. "Mrs. Sonia, your son is no longer here." Silence. A heavy, long, almost unbelievable silence. She replied, "Like this, not here." The search took on another dimension. Doctors, technicians, and even patients who were in the ward during the early hours of the morning were called. One of them swore he saw Messias walking barefoot down the hallway, muttering something about the doors being wrong. Another said he saw him talking to himself, looking at the ceiling as if listening to instructions. Late in the morning, a security guard accessed the camera footage from the psychiatric ward. The last scenes showed Messias standing in front of the bedroom door, motionless, looking into the darkness of the hallway. For a few seconds, he seemed to smile, and then the image froze. When he returned, the room was empty. The mother was taken to a private room. They told her that he had probably escaped, perhaps through a window, perhaps during an oversight. But when the fire department arrived, they discovered something impossible. The windows were locked from the outside, and the safety glass was intact. Even so, the hospital maintained the official version, the patient left on his own. But no one explained how, and no one wanted to comment on why that night the camera system had stopped recording for 7 minutes, right in the hallway where Messias was last seen. 2 days. After his disappearance, Messiah's family no longer believed in official versions. The exhausted mother slept in the hallway, while the older brother, Emerson, insisted on watching the complete recordings. But the hospital claimed technical problems. The tapes from the internal cameras, they said, had been corrupted. Electrical failure. But a security employee, a man named Kleber, became suspicious. He remembered seeing those images before the system disappeared. One morning, Kleber decided to copy part of the file from camera 4, the one pointing towards the psychiatric ward corridor. The video was 8 minutes long, recorded between 3:06 and 3:14 in the morning, exactly the period in which Messias disappeared. In the images, he appears walking slowly barefoot, with his eyes open and his head slightly tilted, as if listening to something in the distance. Behind him, a shadow is cast on the wall, but there is no one there. When he reaches the end of the hallway, something happens. The light flickers. The surveillance system's sound distorts, as if the microphone is picking up a low, metallic, almost human noise. And then Messias stops, slowly turns his face towards the camera, and smiles. Soon after, everything goes black. Kleber told this to Nurse Jessica, who had worked that night. She paled as she listened. She said that just before the failure, the hallway lights began flickering, and the oxygen system in room 11 went off on its own. But room 11 was empty. The next day, Kleber was removed. The hospital alleged misconduct with confidential material, and Jessica never showed up for work again. Neither of them was officially interviewed in the investigation. Messias' mother, without access to the evidence, began receiving anonymous messages with excerpts of the recordings. And in one of them, for a few seconds, you can see the reflection in the door glass. Behind Messias, a tall figure in a white coat accompanies him to the end of the corridor. But on the shift, scheduled that night, no one wearing that uniform was on the team. The following days were filled with despair and silence. Messias' family couldn't get any answers. Authorities said the case was being monitored, but no one was seen investigating. At the hospital, management prohibited comments. Employees were instructed not to speak to the press, and any mention of the name Messiah was cut from internal reports. A local reporter named Paulo M. tried to interview nurses, but they all refused. A nursing technician agreed to speak anonymously. "They're hiding something," he whispered, looking around. That wing shouldn't have been open that night. She said that the hospital was undergoing renovations and that the corridor where Messias was seen was officially closed off, but someone had left the key in the door. The following morning, the mother received an unidentified call. A female voice simply said, "Stop looking. He's still here." The cell phone recorded the number, but the line was disconnected. Hours later, a note was found stuck under her door. "It's not safe to mess with what the hospital keeps." The handwriting was shaky, and the paper was stained with dried blood. The press quickly gave up. The hospital released a statement saying that patient Messias Bastos left the premises voluntarily, and that there is no evidence of misconduct by the staff. But anyone who tried to confront the management realized something. The original recordings had been replaced by edited copies. The final seconds, the ones where he turns his face and smiles at the camera, had been erased. And the most disturbing thing is that, in the new images, there is a subtle detail. The wall clock behind Messias ticks 3812, but in the corner of the screen, the system's digital clock shows 3819, 7 minutes that no one can explain, 7 minutes in which the entire hospital seems to have stopped, and no one remembers what happened. That week, Mandaqui Hospital looked different. The hallways were quieter than usual, and night shifts began to be avoided even by security guards. A nursing assistant swore that sometimes the lights in the psychiatric corridor would turn on by themselves, even when the circuit breaker was off. Others said that in the early hours of the morning the sound of the heart monitors would start beeping in sequence, all at the same time, and then they would stop altogether. It was on one of these nights that Nurse Simone, on duty, went down to get materials from the storage room in the deactivated wing. The elevator stopped on the wrong floor. When the door opened, she saw the partially lit, empty psych ward hallway. At first, he thought it was just an electrical fault, until he noticed a silhouette standing in the background with his back turned. The man wore a white t-shirt and dark pants. Simone called, but he didn't answer. She took a step forward, and the sound of the presence detector turned on the next light. That's when his face slowly turned. It was Messiah, the sunken eyes, the empty face, and a smile that didn't seem human. Before Simone could scream, the lights flickered and he disappeared. She ran back, panicked, and called security. The cameras were checked, and again they failed at the same time, 3U13. In the system logs, the hallway sensor had detected human movement for 12 seconds, but the hospital once again hushed up the incident. 3 employees requested a transfer. Others began to quietly resign, and those who continued swear that in the early hours of Tuesday morning, someone still passes through the deactivated psychiatric ward, a thin, barefoot figure with an old badge hanging from his wrist. The name almost erased by time, Messias Santos Bastos. 3 months later, when the case seemed forgotten, an anonymous flash drive arrived at the newsroom of a small independent news portal. Inside it, there was only one file, mand0313final.move. The journalist who received the material, Paulo M., immediately recognized the name. It was the same reporter who had tried to investigate Messias's disappearance. He opened the video and saw the footage the hospital swore had been lost. Recording starts at 3:06, showing the psychiatric ward corridor. Messiah appears walking slowly, lights flashing above him. Until then, it was the same excerpt already released. But after the seconds of acquaintance, something new appears. The camera seems to change angles on its own, as if someone had rotated it. In the reflection of the glass of a door, it is possible to see Messias staring into space, and a figure in a white coat approaching from behind. The figure has no face. The image distorts. The audio becomes noisy. For a few seconds, you can hear something like heavy breathing, followed by a barely audible whisper. It's not over yet. Then Messias raises his head, looks directly into the lens, and the video ends. Paulo watched the recording dozens of times. Each time, he noticed a different detail, the movement of a shadow, the sound of out-of-sync footsteps, the slight rocking of the camera as if someone were holding the tripod. But the strangest thing is the file's metadata. The creation date marked 3 days after the disappearance. In other words, the video was saved within the hospital's own system. After that, Messiah was no longer there. The journalist tried to publish the article. Minutes after sending the email to the editorial team, the account was hacked. The file disappeared, and the portal received a legal notice of breach of medical confidentiality. Paulo M. lost his job the following week. Months later, he confessed to a friend that he still heard the same sound from the video at night, that deep, metallic breathing stuck between the human and the impossible. It was a former employee, identified only as FL, who contacted the family months later. He had worked for 10 years in maintenance at Mandaqui Hospital and said he kept copies of old reports archived on servers that no one accessed anymore. According to him, the psychiatric ward where Messias disappeared had been built on an old isolation structure, deactivated in the 1970s after a series of unexplained deaths. The location was directly below the hallway where the cameras stopped recording. FL gave the family a flash drive containing internal hospital files. Among them was a record of an emergency maintenance dated the same day as the disappearance, 3/20 am. The reason? Oscillation in underground sensors. No report explained what these sensors were doing there. In one of the attached videos, captured by thermal cameras, it is possible to see an image of heat moving slowly under the floor of the psychiatric ward a few minutes after Messias disappeared. The shape is human, crouched, as if trying to climb up. Soon after, the system restarts and the signal is lost. The former employee also said that, after that night, the engineers received direct orders from management: concrete the accesses, seal the stairs, and erase the record of the lower structure. Everything should disappear from the archives. But one folder survived, and in it there was a report of a patient admitted in 1976 with a diagnosis identical to Messias's and a handwritten note. He woke up during sedation. He said voices were calling from below. The patient's name, Messias Bastos. The same initials, the same surname, an identical case, 48 years earlier. Time passed, but Messias's name continued to be whispered in the corridors of Mandaqui. The psychiatric ward was officially shut down, but new staff sometimes reported hearing footsteps behind the sealed doors, as if someone were walking on concrete. The hospital never admitted anything. No bulletin was reopened, and for the state's records, Messias Santos Bastos simply disappeared. But in 2024, a video began circulating on anonymous internet forums. The short, unsubtitled footage showed the old corridor of the psychiatric ward, filmed on a cell phone. The walls were full of cracks, and in the background a male voice said, "This was his room." Soon after, the cell phone picks up a metallic sound, like chains being dragged, and a figure crosses the corridor towards the camera. The recording ends abruptly. Experts analyzed the video and found something disturbing. The echo of the male voice appears to match Messias's real voice, recorded in clinical reports before his disappearance. But the file is recent, dated March 2024, almost a year after the case. His mother, who still lights candles in the window every night, was shown the video by a reporter. She just replied with tears in her eyes, "I know it's him. He never left there." The hospital denied the authenticity of the material, but the following week, the external lights of the closed wing came on again, by themselves, always at 3:13. And anyone who passes by the sidewalk of Mandaqui Hospital in silence swears. They hear a low sound coming from the walls, like someone knocking slowly, asking to leave. In the end, no one knows what happened that morning. All we know is that, within some hospitals, there are stories that were never written in the medical records, and that the Aurora Hospital keeps trying to tell before someone decides to delete this one too.